The sound of laughter struck the church walls harder than the wind outside. It came in little bursts from men gathered near the stove, hats tipped back, boots crossed at the ankle, their eyes fixed on the woman standing at the front with gloved hands, folded tight enough to whiten the knuckles. The preacher kept his gaze on the open Bible, as if ink and scripture could save him from the room he served. Edith Mercer stood straight despite the heat in her face, 38 years old, widowed 7 years. Once the wife of a banker who had died owing more than he owned. Since then she had sewn hems, balanced ledgers for shopkeepers who paid half what they promised, and rented a narrow room above the bakery where the walls sweated in summer and froze in winter. This morning she had come because the landlady said there was honest work to be found, if pride did not get in the way. She had not known honest work meant being inspected like a horse. Mr. Talbot, who owned half the grain contracts in town and considered Mercy a poor investment, lifted his chin toward her. No offense meant, Mrs. Mercer, but a man seeking a wife seeks children, not spectacles and widow's gloves. More laughter. Edith did not look down at the gloves. They were mended at both thumbs. The preacher cleared his throat. We are here to settle a practical matter. Mr. Hale requires a lawful wife to secure the extension on his ranch mortgage. The bank requires a household on the property and a spouse named in the filing. It is an arrangement, nothing more. A practical matter, as if flesh could be entered in a ledger between cattle feed and fence wire. 3 younger women had already been considered. One refused after hearing the ranch lay 20 miles out. One demanded payment in advance. One had run off with a drummer passing through before sunrise. That left Edith, who needed rent by week's end and had no father, brother, or son to rescue her from arithmetic. Talbot gave a shrug. The matter may be closed. The church door opened with a crack of cold air. Every head turned. He filled the doorway without effort, tall, broad through the shoulders, coat dark with dust. A scar ran pale along his jaw, disappearing beneath rough beard stubble. Snowmelt dripped from the brim of his hat onto warped floorboards. He looked less like a groom than a man entering a dispute he expected to settle with his hands. Jonah Hale removed his gloves, finger by finger. I was told there'd be papers, he said. No greeting, no apology for lateness. The preacher swallowed. There are. Talbot spread his hands. You came too late, Hale. No suitable match remains. Jonah's eyes moved across the room once. They did not linger on the stove, the preacher, or Talbot. They stopped on Edith. She met the look, because lowering her gaze would have felt like agreement. Talbot laughed softly. That one's too old to be wanted. The silence after it seemed to sharpen. Jonah stepped forward. Mud cracked from his boots. Then every man here is a fool. The room went still enough to hear the stove iron tick. Edith felt something stranger than gratitude, anger, because he had defended her as one might defend a useful tool wrongly priced. Talbot's face colored. Mind yourself. I am. Jonah looked to the preacher. Read the papers. The preacher nearly rushed to obey. Names, property description, terms of mortgage extension, joint occupancy, legal marriage recognized by county authority. Edith heard each word as if through water. Mrs. Mercer, the preacher said weakly, do you consent? She could leave, return to her room, wait for eviction, seek more sewing from women who pitied her in public and underpaid her in private. Watch winter come through thin walls. She lifted her chin. I consent. Hale? Jonah's gaze never softened. Yes. The ceremony took less than 3 minutes. When it was done, no one cheered. Talbot muttered to a companion. Someone coughed. The preacher signed where required. Jonah signed with a hard, fast stroke. Edith wrote her name with the careful penmanship that once impressed bank clients and now meant nothing at all. Mrs. Edith Hale. The sight of it jarred her more than the vows. Jonah folded the papers and tucked them inside his coat. Wagons outside. That was all. He did not offer his arm. She did not expect it. Outside, the wind cut sharp as tin. The town street lay in brown slush and wheel ruts. Horses steamed at the hitching posts. From the mercantile porch, 2 women watched her with the fixed interest reserved for accidents and scandals. Edith climbed into the wagon without assistance. Her valise held 2 dresses, 1 shawl, her account book, and the silver thimble that had belonged to her mother. Jonah mounted the seat beside her, gathered the reins, and turned the team toward the open road. Town fell behind in a scatter of roofs and smoke. For a long while there was only the creak of leather, the jolt of wheels over frozen ruts, and the endless plains stretched beneath a low sky. Dry grass bowed under wind. Fences leaned where posts had rotted. Far off, a line of black cattle moved like spilled ink. Edith tucked her hands beneath her shawl. "You might have sent for someone younger." "I sent for no one. Then why marry at all? The bank wants signatures more than cents." His voice was flat, but fatigue sat under it. She studied the profile he offered the horizon. A man carved out of resistance. There were shadows beneath his eyes. His gloves had been mended more crudely than hers. "How near are you to losing it?" she asked. He glanced at her then, brief and hard. "Near enough." She almost apologized for prying. Instead, she said, "I know figures. Do you? I kept books for Mercer and Lane until my husband died, then for 3 shops after." "That's so." "You sound doubtful." "I sound busy driving." The answer should have stung. Instead, she found, to her own surprise, the edge of humor in it. Barely there. Like heat from a coal buried under ash. They rode another mile. At last he said, "House roof leaks in the back room. Stove draws poorly in wind. Pump freezes before dawn if the bucket's left empty." "You'll have food." "Not much comfort. You make a compelling welcome." "It isn't welcome. It's fact." She turned to the plains again. "Fact suits me better than promises." That earned the smallest pause. When the ranch appeared, it did not rise from the land so much as endure upon it. A long, weathered house with sagging porch rails, barn listing slightly west, corrals patched with mismatched boards, smoke from the chimney, thin and uncertain. The place looked exactly what it was, a hard season away from surrender. 2 ranch hands stood by the gate, one older, one scarcely more than a boy. Both stared openly at the woman beside their employer. Jonah climbed down first. This time he offered a hand, though he looked irritated to be doing it. Edith took it. His palm was rough, warm despite the cold, and gone too quickly. "This is Mrs. Hale," he said to the men. The older hand blinked. "Since when?" "Since this morning." The boy grinned before schooling his face. Jonah lifted Edith's valise as if it weighed nothing. "Ben, see to the team. Nate, bring in that flour sack before it gets damp." He spoke in commands because commands were safer than explanations. Inside, the house smelled of ash, old wood, and coffee boiled too long. The kitchen table bore knife marks deep as creek beds. A lamp chimney needed cleaning. One curtain hung by 2 rings instead of 4. Scarcity had fingerprints everywhere. Jonah set down her valise near the stove. "You'll have the back room, the leaking one. It leaks less than the front." She removed her gloves slowly. "Do you always improve bad news by comparison?" His mouth shifted. Not a smile. The memory of one. "Supper at 6, he said, "if you plan to stay." She looked at the worn floorboards, the failing stove, the man already turning away as if regret might catch him if he lingered. Then she looked at the shelf near the door where bills had been shoved beneath a horseshoe, edges curling unpaid. "I plan," she said quietly, "to see your ledgers first." He stopped with his hand on the door latch. For the first time since the church, something in his expression changed. Not warmth, not trust, interest. Outside, the wind rose against the walls, and somewhere in the barn, a frightened horse began to kick. Jonah did not answer at once. He stood with one hand on the latch while the horse thudded again in the barn, wood rattling under the force of it. Most men would have barked an order, gone at once, or laughed off the challenge from a woman who had been in his house less than a minute. He did none of those things. He only turned his head enough to look back at her. "You came here to count numbers?" "I came here to keep from being turned into the street." Edith removed her shawl and folded it over the chair back. "If numbers are the reason I was married, then numbers may as well be of use." Another kick sounded. He opened the door. "Horse first," he said. "Ledgers after." Then he was gone into the hard wind. Edith stood alone in the kitchen and let herself breathe. The room was colder than it ought to be. Draft slipped through the window frame above the sink. The stove held heat badly, one hinge warped so the door did not seal. She crossed to it, crouched, and saw ash packed too high beneath the grate. No wonder it drew poorly. Fire could not breathe. She took the poker and set to work. By the time the door opened again, she had ash in the hem of her skirt and both cheeks warm from exertion. Jonah stepped in carrying the smell of hay, leather, and cold air. He stopped when he saw the stove burning clean and steady. "What did you do?" "Made room for the fire." He stared at the flame as if suspicious of it. "It was choking," she added. "So am I, and no one's fixed that." The words came dry enough to pass for nothing, but weariness lay under them. He stripped off his gloves and set them by the sink. His knuckles were split from old work and fresh strain. She straightened. "You should salve those. They're hands. They are injured hands. They'll remain so." He moved past her before she could answer and reached above the cupboard for a ledger wrapped in cloth. Dust marked where it had sat untouched too long. He dropped it on the table. There. Edith untied the cloth. The book inside was swollen from damp and written in 2 inks, 3 hands, in no clear order. Feed costs crowded beside calf counts. Fence repairs appeared twice. A note on interest due had been scratched through and rewritten lower on the page. Receipts were tucked between leaves like abandoned prayers. She looked up slowly. Did a cyclone keep these books? Jonah poured coffee into a chipped mug. "I kept them. That was unkind to cyclones." The boy from outside, Nate, let out a bark of laughter from the doorway before clapping a hand over his mouth. Jonah's eyes cut toward him. "You got work?" "Yes, sir." Nate vanished. Edith bent over the ledger to hide the traitorous flicker of satisfaction in her chest. She worked while daylight thinned. Columns were rebuilt, duplicate charges marked, missing totals supplied. She asked questions without ceremony. "How many heads sold in September?" 21. "This says 19. Then write 21. I'll write what can be proved." He said nothing to that. "How much do you owe Talbot directly?" "Too much. That is not a sum. It's the one that matters." She lifted her gaze. "If you prefer ruin wrapped in pride, say so now, and I shall save us both the evening." For a moment she thought he might flare. Instead, he set down the mug with care that cost him effort. $287, he said. "Separate from the bank." She wrote it down. Night gathered outside the windows. The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse, leaving the main house quiet except for pen scratches and the pop of settling wood. Edith found flour, salt pork, and onions enough for a simple meal. She cooked while still checking figures between the stirs of the pot. Jonah watched once from the doorway to the kitchen, then looked away when she noticed. At supper they sat across from one another at the scarred table. He tasted the stew, paused, and took another spoonful. "There's time in it," he said. "There was time in the cupboard. I know what was in the cupboard. I've looked at it for months. Then you might have used it." He almost smiled. Almost. The sight unsettled her more than his coldness had. After they ate, she turned the ledger back toward him and tapped the page. "You are not ruined. That differs from what the bank says. The bank says you were disordered. That is not the same condition." He leaned over the table, shoulder near hers, close enough that she caught the clean metallic scent of cold on his coat and horse sweat drying in the wool. "Explain." His nearness should not have mattered. It did. "You are paying cash for supplies you ought to barter for after harvest. You are selling cattle at poor weeks because notes come due all at once. Your foreman overbought nails by nearly $30. I have no foreman. The older hand, then. Ben can't count past 10 unless he removes his boots. Then stop sending him to town with money." A sound left Jonah that might have been a laugh if laughter had forgotten the road to him. She continued, "You need staggered obligations, not stacked ones. And someone must speak with Talbot." "No." The word landed hard. She folded her hands. "Because?" "Because Talbot likes seeing men bend. I won't. And if standing straight costs the ranch," his jaw tightened, "there are prices worse than loss." She thought of creditors pawning her husband's books by the pound, thought of women whispering pity on stair landings, thought of the church laughter that morning. "Yes," she said softly, "there are." The room held stillness after that. At last he rose and carried both bowls to the basin before she could gather them. Practical, wordless. It cost him something to do it where she could see. You need sleep, he said. I need dry paper and your receipts. You need sleep first. She should have argued. Instead, she took the lamp in her valise and followed the narrow hall to the back room. The roof had indeed leaked. A bucket sat under a stain in the corner. The bed was small but clean. One quilt, one washstand. Frost silvered the inside edge of the window pane. She set the lamp down and touched the quilt. It smelled of sun-dried cloth and cedar. Someone had taken care of storing it. There came a knock. Not waiting for invitation, Jonah opened the door halfway and held out a folded item. A thicker blanket. Nights drop hard before dawn, he said. She accepted it. Thank you. He gave one short nod, then looked past her shoulder at the bucket in the corner as if ashamed of the room itself. I'll mend the roof when the weather clears. I have lived under worse. His eyes came back to hers. You won't hear. He shut the door before she could answer. Edith stood with the blanket in her hands and felt, against all reason, less alone than she had in years. She slept lightly. Wind worried the eaves. Once she heard boots cross the porch, once low voices from the yard. Before dawn a new sound woke her, the cough of the pump handle outside, then a curse cut short. She dressed quickly and stepped into the blue cold. Jonas stood at the pump bareheaded, sleeves rolled, striking the frozen handle with a wrench. Water had sealed it solid. His breath smoked white in the dark. You'll break it, she said. It's broken now. Move. He stared as if no one had used that tone with him in a decade. Move, she repeated. Perhaps because dawn had not yet given him strength to argue, he stepped aside. Edith ran to the kitchen, seized the kettle from the stove, and returned with steaming water. She poured slowly over the iron joint while working the handle in careful increments. Ice cracked, metal groaned. Then with a shudder, water burst free in a clear stream over the bucket. Jonah looked at the flowing water, then at her. How did you know that? My father kept a farm before he failed at gentility. The corner of his mouth moved again. Behind them, Ben had come from the bunkhouse and witnessed the whole thing. He spat into the dirt, grinning. Reckon we married above ourselves, boss. Jonah's gaze never left Edith. Get to work, Ben. But the order lacked its usual force, because for the first time since she crossed his threshold, the house behind them did not feel like his alone. And from the road beyond the gate came the distant rattle of wheels, approaching too early for any friendly call. The wagon reached the gate in a spray of mud and frost. No one came calling friendly at that hour, with horses lathered and wheels driven hard. Ben's grin vanished. Nate, still shrugging into his coat, stopped halfway from the bunkhouse steps. Jonah set the full bucket aside and moved before thought showed on his face. Inside, he said to Edith. She did not move. Who is it? He was already striding toward the yard gate, inside. There were ways men tried to protect women that felt too much like dismissal. This was one of them. She followed anyway, but only as far as the porch. The wagon driver hauled the team short and climbed down stiffly. It was the preacher from town, coat buttoned wrong in his haste, spectacles fogged by breath. Mr. Hale. He bent over, hands on knees. They're posting notices. Jonah stopped. What notices? The preacher straightened and pulled folded papers from inside his coat. Claim notices. Talbot filed a petition before dawn. Says your marriage was fraudulent and arranged solely to evade default. Says occupancy terms were not met in good faith. Edith came down the porch steps before Jonah could forbid it. That filing would have required signatures yesterday, she said. The preacher blinked at her, then seemed to remember she existed as more than a church embarrassment. Yes, ma'am. I believe he prepared it before the ceremony. So he meant to deny any wife he disliked and seize the land regardless. That is my reading. Jonah took the papers. His face changed very little, which meant he was furious. Ben muttered a curse. Nate looked between them all with the alarm of youth discovering that grown men could be both powerful and petty. When does the hearing stand? Edith asked. Tomorrow noon, said the preacher, at the county office, tomorrow. Jonah folded the notice once, sharply. Convenient. Talbot wanted no time for defense, no time to gather records, no time to prove the marriage was lawful and the ranch was inhabited by a household. He wanted panic. Edith held out her hand. After a beat, Jonah gave her the paper. She read fast. Legal phrasing, inflated accusations, claims that Hale maintained no stable domestic residence, claims that no woman of sound judgment would enter such an arrangement freely, claims that the property had fallen below productive threshold. Her eyes narrowed. He wrote this for insult first and law second. That sounds like him, Ben said. Jonah turned toward the house. I'll hitch a team. For what? To town. With what argument, she asked. My own. And when that fails? He faced her fully. Morning light had just begun to gray the plains behind him. You think I should sit? I think you should stop mistaking motion for progress. The ranch hands went very still. No one spoke to Jonah Hale that way and remained comfortable afterward. Yet he only looked at her as if recalculating a map. What would you do? He asked. It was the first time he had asked rather than commanded. She lifted the notice. First, prove occupancy, a functioning household, meals prepared, rooms in use, shared accounts began. Second, challenge the productive threshold with actual herd numbers. Third, expose Talbot's prior intent. The preacher frowned. How? You said he filed before dawn. Who witnessed? Clerk named Peters. Then Peters can testify papers were prepared before the ceremony concluded. If Talbot intended rejection regardless of lawful marriage, the petition appears malicious. The preacher's brows rose inch by inch. Jonah said nothing. She continued, already sorting tasks. Ben, how many cattle wintered alive? Ben straightened from surprise. 112. How many calves expected? Near 30 if the weather holds. Nate, when did the south fence get repaired? 3 weeks back. By whom? Me, Ben, and Mr. Hale. She nodded. Productive labor maintained. Good. Jonah's gaze stayed on her face, unreadable. The preacher cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, were you trained in law? No, only in surviving men who believed paperwork belonged solely to them. Ben barked a laugh. Within the hour, the kitchen table had become a war room. Receipts dried near the stove. Feed invoices stacked by month. Edith rewrote accounts in clean columns while Jonah fetched records from drawers, shelves, and coat pockets where they had languished. He obeyed directions with visible strain, but he obeyed them. Sales slips from Autumn, he handed them over. Bank notices from a tin box, any letter from Talbot. A pause. Then from his breast pocket, folded soft from handling. She glanced up. You keep this one close, so I remember what's owed. She opened it. It was not a demand for money. It was an offer made 6 months earlier. Sell 20 acres at half value and clear personal debt. A scavenger's bargain. You refused, yes? Good. Something eased in his shoulders at the single word. By midday, they rode to town together. The road was rutted mud by then, thaw loosening the top crust. Edith sat beside Jonah on the wagon seat with papers tied in twine on her lap. The distance between their shoulders narrowed whenever the wheels struck deep holes, then widened again. You can still leave, he said after miles of silence. She looked ahead. Can I? If Talbot wins. That was not the question. He tightened the reins. No. The honesty of it moved through her more sharply than comfort would have. Town watched them arrive. Heads turned from the blacksmith, the hotel porch, the mercantile windows. News traveled faster than trains in places with little else to entertain them. The woman too old to be wanted had returned, wearing a rancher's name and carrying papers. Inside the county office, heat from a coal stove mixed with dust and ink. Shelves bowed under deed books. A clerk with thin hair looked up as they entered. Mr. Peters? Edith asked. He nodded warily. She set Talbot's notice on the counter. You witnessed this filing? I did. At what hour? Near dawn. Were the blanks completed then? He shifted. Most of them. Before the marriage was performed, Jonah made a small sound under his breath, half surprise. Peters glanced toward Jonah, then back to Edith. I suppose. No suppose. Were they? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. She smiled once politely, and the man nearly sat straighter from receiving it. Outside, Talbot stood across the street beneath the awning of the mercantile, as if summoned by malice itself. 2 men flanked him. He looked at Edith with open disdain, and at Jonah with practiced satisfaction. Hale, he called. Brought your clerk to town? Jonah's body went hard beside her. Edith answered before he could. No, Mr. Talbot. He brought his wife. A few nearby shoppers slowed. Listening is the town's oldest trade. Talbot's eyes flicked over her bonnet, gloves, plain coat. Temporary titles do not alter nature. Neither does money. The street quieted further. Talbot smiled without warmth. You imagine yourself clever, I imagine you are careless. Preparing a petition before the facts were settled suggests fear. Color touched his cheeks. Jonah took one step forward. That's enough. Talbot addressed him instead. You were drowning before this. She cannot save rotten timber and poor bloodlines. There are insults aimed at a man, and insults aimed through him toward the dead. This was both. Jonah's fists closed. Edith touched his sleeve, lightly, once. He stilled. Talbot noticed that too. His gaze sharpened with a new kind of interest, the kind predators reserve for weakness discovered. Careful, Hale, he said softly. Looks like she handles you already. He turned and went inside the mercantile. The street exhaled in murmurs. Jonah's jaw worked. I should have broken his teeth years ago. And fed him martyrdom? She asked. He deserves worse. Then let him lose publicly. It lasts longer. He looked down at the hand still resting on his sleeve. She withdrew it at once, heat rising to her face despite the cold wind. They bought paper, lamp oil, and thread, with coins counted carefully. At the counter, Mrs. Barlow, the same woman who had watched from the porch yesterday, wrapped the purchases and said without meeting Edith's eyes, Heard you fixed the Hale pump this morning. Water and Patience fixed it. Mrs. Barlow tied the parcel string tighter than needed. Town says many things. It doesn't often say useful ones. It was as close to respect as gossip knew how to speak. By the time they reached the wagon, clouds had thickened low and fast. Snow threatened from the west. Jonah loaded the parcels. Storm's coming. Then we should hurry. He turned, the parcel still in hand. Why did you stop me back there? From striking Talbot? Yes, she could have said strategy. Could have said hearings and appearances and legal sense. Instead, the truth came first. Because if they took you from me over him, I would be left fighting alone. The words hung between them, visible as breath. She had not meant to speak to them. Neither, perhaps, had he meant to hear them that way. His grip tightened on the parcel until paper creased. Then he set it down gently in the wagon bed. Get in, he said, voice roughened by something deeper than anger. She climbed to the seat. He took the reins beside her, but for the first mile home he drove one-handed. The other hand remained closed hard against his thigh, as if holding back a feeling he had no name for. Snow began as a fine grain in the air, too light to trust and too steady to ignore. By the second mile, the road had blurred into pale ruts between fields of dead grass. Wind came sideways across the plains, finding every seam in the coat and glove. Jonah drove with his shoulders braced and eyes narrowed against the white. Edith held the packet of papers beneath her cloak to keep damp from the ink. We should have left town sooner, he said. We left when the work was done. That is not the same thing. No, she answered. It is better. He gave her a look that would have withered easier company. She turned her face to the storm and hid the small satisfaction it brought. The team slowed near a washout where thaw had softened the bank. One wheel dropped hard. The wagon lurched sharp enough to throw her sideways. Jonah caught her by the waist before she struck the seat rail. His hand was broad, firm, and instantly withdrawn. You hurt? No. He climbed down into slush without another word and shouldered at the wheel. Mud swallowed his boots to the ankle. The horses strained. The wagon groaned and rose free. By the time he climbed back up, snow clung to his lashes. Your sleeve is soaked, Edith said. It'll dry. It'll freeze first. He snapped the reins. You object to every fact I state, only the foolish ones. The answer earned that near smile again, gone before certainty. They reached the ranch at dusk under a sky the color of iron. Ben and Nate hurried from the barn to help with the team. Wind banged the loose gate against its post. South hinge is giving, Ben shouted. Fix it after feeding, Jonah called back. It'll tear clean off by then move faster. Inside, the kitchen felt warmer than the day had any right to deserve. The stove still held a clean fire from morning. Edith set the papers high on a shelf. Jonah stripped off his wet coat and hung it near the heat. Water dripped from the hem onto the floorboards. She fetched a rag. I can do that, he said. You're not doing it. I have hands, injured ones, chilled ones, and stubborn ones. She knelt and wiped the puddle before he could protest further. When she rose, he was watching her with an expression she could not read, because no one had ever directed such attention at her before. Not pity, not appraisal, regard. Ben stomped in carrying a broken hinge. Told you. Jonah took the iron piece. Jonah took. Lantern in the shed. Burned out. I'll mend it in the dark then. He moved for the door. Edith blocked him without planning to. They stopped close enough that the cold on his clothes met the warmth of hers in the narrow space between. You have been on the road half the day, she said. Eat first. The gate can't wait. It has waited years by the look of it. It can wait 10 minutes. His eyes dropped briefly to the place where her shoulder nearly touched his chest, then rose again. Move, Mrs. Hale. No. Ben, sensing weather more dangerous than snow, backed toward the hall. Jonah lowered his voice. You order everyone now. Only those determined to make burdens of themselves. For a long beat, neither yielded. Then he stepped aside, went to the table, and sat. Ben nearly grinned himself in two. Edith served stew reheated with fresh bread she had mixed while the men handled stock. Nate came in smelling of hay and youth, too hungry to notice tension. They ate with spoons in silence until Ben said, Casual as a thrown match. Town says hearing'll draw a crowd. Jonah did not look up. Then the town lacks chores. Nate glanced at Edith. You ain't worried, ma'am? She tore bread in half. Worry is useful only if it can count. The boy blinked. I don't know what that means. It means fear without labor is vanity, she said. Ben barked laughter into his bowl. After supper, Jonah took the hinge and lantern chimney to the workbench by the wall. Edith cleared dishes, then sat again with the ledgers. Wind pushed at the windows. Snow hissed along the porch boards. She heard the scrape of file on metal, steady and exact. He worked as he did everything, with contained force. Without looking up, she asked, How long since your wife died? The file stopped. Ben and Nate had already gone to the bunkhouse. The house held only stove crackles and the sound of the question lying where it fell. I had no wife, Jonah said at last. She looked over. He fitted the hinge pin back through iron loops. There was a woman. We were to marry. Fever took her 2 weeks before. The plainness of it struck harder than any dramatic telling. I'm sorry. He shrugged once. Sorry doesn't alter graves. No. He set the hinge down. Your husband. Debt took him slower than fever. Pride helped. She expected him to return to work. Instead he asked, Did you love him? The room seemed suddenly smaller. I was young, she said. I admired being chosen. That isn't an answer. No. She folded a receipt too sharply. It may be the truest one. He studied her a moment, then returned to the hinge. The file resumed. Later, when the wind worsened, the roof began to drip in the back room. Slow. Measured. Into the waiting bucket. Edith carried her lamp to inspect it and found a second wet mark spreading near the bedstead. Jonah appeared in the doorway behind her, as if summoned by inconvenience itself. Stay in the kitchen tonight, he said. And where will you sleep? Chair. That is absurd. It is furniture, she turned. This house contains 2 beds. His expression hardened from reflex. No. Because propriety has become dear to you overnight? Because arrangements need boundaries, she should have agreed. Instead, irritation sharpened her voice. Boundaries are easier for those with dry rooms. He stepped inside, ducking the low frame. The lamp lit one side of his face, left the scar in shadow. You think this is comfort for me? I think you prefer hardship if it lets you remain unquestioned. The drip into the bucket counted seconds. At last, he took the lamp from her hand and set it on the washstand. Take the front room. And you? I said chair. She looked at the broad set of his shoulders, the fatigue in every line of him, the absurd nobility of suffering for no audience but himself. No, she said more quietly. We share the bed, fully clothed, with enough distance to preserve your cherished boundaries. His gaze fixed on hers. Absolutely not. Then I shall take the chair. You wouldn't. She moved for the hall. He caught her wrist. Not hard, never hard. But the contact ran through them both like a struck wire. His hand released at once. Edith. The use of her first name stilled the room. He seemed to hear it only after it was spoken. She did too. It was different in his voice than any title had been. Closer, more dangerous. He looked away first. Take the bed. She should have let him retreat behind command. Instead, she said very softly, There is room enough. The storm pressed at the house. Somewhere a shutter banged loose. When they lay down at last, both remained atop the blankets, boots off, clothes on, a full foot of mattress between them. The room was dark save for an ember glow under the door. Edith listened to his breathing, measured and wakeful. "You snore?" she asked into the dark. "No." "Good." A pause. "Do you?" "No." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Good." She smiled where he could not see. Hours later, she woke to thunder of hooves, then men's voices outside, then the sharp crack of wood splitting in the yard. Jonah was already out of bed before she sat upright. He reached for his boots and said only one word: "Stay." The second crack came louder, not wood shifting in the wind, deliberate force, fence rail or gate post struck by iron. Jonah jammed his feet into his boots and seized the shotgun from behind the door. In the ember dark, his shape was all motion and intent. "Stay," he said again. Edith was already reaching for the lamp. He swore under his breath. For once, explain. Men outside. I gathered that. He opened the front door a hand's width, and the storm shoved snow through the gap. Voices carried from the yard, 3, perhaps 4. Laughter, a horse snorting hard, then another blow against timber. Ben's shout rose from the bunkhouse. Jonah stepped onto the porch, gun low but ready. "Who's there?" a voice answered through the wind. Night callers, Talbot's foreman. Rourke. Edith had seen him in town often enough, thick-necked, quick to sneer, useful to men who preferred dirty work done by other hands. "Your gate looked weak," Rourke called. "We came to test it." Another laugh followed. Jonah's shoulders went still in the way that meant danger. "You've tested enough. Ride off." "Or what?" The shotgun lifted 1 inch. Inside the house, Edith set the lamp high and moved to the kitchen window. Frost blurred the pane, but shapes crossed the yard, mounted men near the broken gate, one swinging a club at the fence rail for sport. This was no theft. It was a warning. Break a man's property the night before judgment, keep him tired, keep him angry, make him strike first if he could be baited into it. Ben came running from the bunkhouse with an axe handle. Nate behind him, pale and barefoot in one boot. Back inside, Jonah barked without turning. Ben ignored him. 3 riders, east side. Rourke laughed. "You breeding courage now, Hale?" Edith's gaze dropped to the kitchen table where their hearing papers lay stacked beside the lamp. If those men got inside or set fire to the porch, every record would be lost. She moved at once. First, she snatched the papers and tied them in an oilcloth. Then she carried them to the stove alcove and shoved them behind the flour barrel where sparks could not reach. Next, she seized the iron dinner bell from its hook by the pantry. She stepped onto the porch before Jonah could stop her. Snow hit her face like thrown sand. Back inside, he snapped. Instead, she rang the bell. Once, twice, again. The hard clang cut through wind and laughter alike. Lights kindled in the dark distance beyond the creek. Neighboring spreads, small and far but visible. Dogs began barking across the plains. A lantern flared near the Dawson place half a mile off. Rourke shifted in his saddle. "What's that for?" She rang again. "For witnesses," Edith said. The yard changed. Men who enjoy bullying in darkness rarely admire an audience. Rourke spat into the snow. "You hiding behind a woman now, Hale?" Jonah's voice dropped so low it nearly vanished under the storm. "You should pray that's all I'm doing." The rider by the fence swung his club once more in bravado, but less surely. Hoofbeats sounded from the west road, someone coming fast. A lantern bobbed into view. Then another. Neighbor Dawson rode in with his 2 grown sons, coats buttoned wrong in haste, rifles across their laps. Behind them came old Mrs. Pike in a mule cart with a shovel, and no visible fear at all. She squinted through the snow. "Who's making noise enough to wake decent folk?" Rourke cursed. Dawson reined up at the yard edge. "Evening, Hale. Trouble?" "Leaving now," Jonah said. Rourke stared at the gathering lights, measured the changed odds, and pulled his horse around. "This ain't finished." "No," Edith said. "It begins tomorrow at noon." He rode out hard, his men after him, one nearly losing his seat at the broken gate. Silence returned in ragged pieces. Ben let out a breath. Nate finally found his missing boot and jammed it on backward. Mrs. Pike climbed down from the cart, shovel in hand. Her shawl was crusted white with snow. She looked Edith up and down, then nodded once as if confirming something long suspected. Knew there was sense in this house now. She marched inside without invitation. The kitchen filled quickly with neighbors stomping snow from boots and accepting coffee before asking for it. Dawson inspected the damaged gate. His sons helped Ben brace the split rail. Mrs. Pike occupied Jonah's chair and commanded Nate to fetch more wood. No one mentioned that a woman had summoned them all. They simply answered the bell. Edith moved among them with mugs and towels, steadying her own breath only when hands were occupied. Jonah watched her from across the room while speaking to Dawson in low tones. At one point he crossed to take the kettle from her before she lifted it. "It's heavy," he said. "So am I." He ignored that. "You should sit. You should thank me." "For what?" "For preventing you from doing something dramatic and foolish." His eyes held hers a beat too long. "I'm considering it." "Then begin with gratitude." The corner of his mouth shifted. "Later," he said. When the neighbors finally left, promising to attend the hearing if called, the house felt larger and quieter than before. Stormlight thinned toward dawn behind the curtains. No one had slept enough to matter. Ben and Nate returned to the bunkhouse. Dawson took first watch by the repaired gate. Mrs. Pike departed only after forcing a loaf of bread into Edith's hands and warning Jonah that stubborn men died younger. The front door shut on her last sentence. Jonah leaned the shotgun back in its place. "You should have stayed inside. You said that already. You could have been hurt." "So could you. That's different. Only to you." He rubbed a hand over his face. Weariness roughened every line of him. "Why ring the bell?" She set cups in the basin one by one, because men like Rourke thrive where shame is private. He watched her hands. And because... She paused. Because the thought of losing this place now struck too close. Because seeing him step into the storm with a gun had split something inside her that wanted him safe more than it wanted distance. Because being left alone again had become, without permission, harder to imagine. "Because we needed help," she said at last. He knew it was not the whole answer, but he let it stand. Morning came gray and raw. They dressed for town in silence made gentler by exhaustion. Edith wore her plainest dark dress and pinned her hat firmly. Jonah shaved the stubble from his jaw with a straight razor at the basin, revealing the full pale line of the scar. She had never asked how he got it. He caught her looking in the mirror. Fence staple, horse spooked. "I expected a gunfight or war. Life disappoints." "It often does." He set the razor down. "Not always." The words were quiet enough to be mistaken for thought. She was not sure he meant to say them aloud. They rode to town under a clearing sky. Snowmelt dripped from fence wire. Mud sucked at the wheels. At every crossing they passed others headed the same direction: farmers, wives, loafers, boys too young for business and old enough for spectacle. By noon the county office overflowed. Men lined the walls, women clustered near the stove. Talbot stood at the front in a tailored coat, confidence polished brighter than his boots. Rourke lingered behind him, with a bruise darkening one cheek where, perhaps, a branch had objected on the ride home. The clerk called for an order. Jonah took his place beside Edith. Talbot smiled thinly. "Ready to surrender with dignity?" Edith untied the oilcloth bundle and laid out their ledgers in neat stacks. "No," she said. "Are you ready to count?" A ripple of interest moved through the room. The clerk lifted a hand in silence and began to read the petition. When he reached the charge that no lawful household existed on the Hale property, the front door opened once more. Mrs. Pike entered late, carrying the iron dinner bell, and every head in the room turned toward her. Mrs. Pike did not hurry. She advanced through the packed room with the bell hanging from one gloved hand, as if it were a church relic and she was its appointed keeper. Men moved aside without being asked. Women made space near the stove. Even Talbot's polished certainty dimmed a shade under the force of an old widow who feared no one because she had buried enough to make social discomfort laughable. She set the bell on the clerk's table with a hard iron knock. "That," she said, "is from the Hale kitchen porch. Rang before dawn when riders came breaking gates." A murmur spread through the room. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Mrs. Pike, you will wait to be called. I have waited through 3 wars, 2 husbands, and 27 winters. I'll stand where I please. No one challenged her. Edith kept her face composed, but warmth stirred beneath her ribs. Public opinion in frontier towns turned slow until it turned all at once. Today it was beginning to shift. The clerk cleared his throat and resumed. Petitioner alleges the marriage was entered under false pretenses and no genuine domestic residence has been established. Talbot's lawyer, a narrow man named Clegg with cuffs too white for honest work, stepped forward. The matter is plain. Mr. Hale sought to evade default by procuring a nominal wife. The woman in question had no prior connection to the property, no established household there, and no expectation of ordinary marriage. The phrase "woman in question" landed like dirt thrown from a boot. Jonah's jaw hardened. Edith touched the ledger with 2 fingers, grounding herself in paper and ink. Clegg continued. Further, the ranch is in decline and unlikely to recover. The bank's interests are endangered by delay. The clerk turned. Response. Jonah opened his mouth. Edith spoke first. Yes. The room shifted again, surprised by the clear steadiness of her voice. Clegg frowned. I address the property holder. You address a married household named in the filing, she replied, and I keep the books you are discussing badly. A few people near the wall coughed into hidden smiles. The clerk looked between them, then nodded. Proceed. She rose. Her gloves lay folded beside the ledger. She left them there. Bare hands on paper felt stronger. The petitioner claims no domestic residence exists, she said, yet meals have been prepared, rooms occupied, accounts joined, and neighbors summoned to that residence this very morning by the bell before you. Mrs. Pike grunted approval. The petitioner claims fraud, yet his own filing was prepared before the marriage concluded. Clegg straightened sharply, unsupported. Call Mr. Peters. The clerk did. Peters shuffled forward, looking like a man who regretted literacy. Under questioning, he admitted the petition had been largely completed at dawn, with names and accusations already entered. Clegg objected. The clerk overruled. Talbot's face cooled by degrees. Edith opened the reorganized ledger. The petitioner also claims productive failure. Here are winter herd counts, expected calves, repair labor, and revised obligations demonstrating solvency if payment dates are staggered rather than stacked. She handed pages to the clerk. He scanned, blinked, then scanned again. These figures were not in prior submissions. They could not be, she said. Prior submissions were chaos. Laughter broke outright this time, quickly stifled. Jonah looked at her as if seeing a landscape alter under rain. Clegg recovered enough to sneer. And we are to accept that you, newly arrived, know this ranch better than men who have dealt with it for years? No, Edith said. You are to accept arithmetic. Even the clerk smiled before hiding it. Clegg tried another angle. Mrs. Hale, did you marry for affection? The room leaned in. It was a cruel question, because either answer might be used against her. She met his gaze. I married out of necessity. A small rustle of satisfaction came from Talbot's side. She continued before it settled. As many men do when they marry land, credit, or family name, necessity does not void a lawful vow. It merely offends romantics. The satisfaction died where it sat. Talbot stepped forward at last. This is theater. Jonah moved then, not with violence, with presence. He came to stand beside Edith, broad as a doorframe, and placed one calloused hand on the ledger near hers. The gesture was practical enough to deny sentiment. It changed the room more than any speech could have. No, he said. This is my wife. Silence struck deep and clean. He had not called her that before where anyone could hear. Talbot's eyes narrowed. You think saying it makes it true? Jonah did not raise his voice. I think the law already did. The clerk coughed into order. Given the evidence of residence, hostile pre-preparation of petition, and revised account suggesting viable continuation, immediate seizure is denied. Extension review to proceed under amended schedule pending bank approval. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then, sound returned all at once. Ben whooped from the back wall. Nate nearly knocked over a chair. Mrs. Pike seized her bell and rang at once in triumph. Women began talking over each other. Men pretended they had expected this result from the start. Talbot stood rigid. He had not lost everything, but he had lost publicly, and some defeats poisoned future authority. He turned to go, then looked at Edith. You've bought time. Nothing more, she answered calmly. Time is all competent people require. He left without another word. Outside, sunlight broke through the last cloud cover, bright on mud and thawing roofs. The crowd spilled after them, hungry for fresh retellings. Hands clapped Jonah's shoulder. Ben repeated portions of Edith's answers with improvements already added. Mrs. Barlow from the Mercantile stopped Edith near the steps. You'll need proper curtains out there, she said brusquely. I've some spare cloth. It was not an apology. It was better. Thank you, Edith said. Mrs. Barlow sniffed and moved on. Jonah waited by the wagon while the square slowly emptied. He seemed less comfortable with congratulations than with blizzards. You were quiet in there, Edith said when she reached him. You weren't. Did that trouble you? No. He took the papers from her arms before she could climb in. Then, after a pause, it impressed me. The plainness of it struck harder than praise dressed finer. They rode home under clear sky. Meltwater flashed in ditches, larks skimmed low over the grass. For several miles neither spoke, and the silence felt altered now, not empty but occupied. At a rough stretch in the road, the wagon jolted. She slid slightly. His hand caught her elbow and remained there a moment longer than balance required. When he withdrew it, both looked ahead. Back at the ranch, work waited as if courtrooms had never been invented. A calf had slipped through a fence gap. Feed sacks needed moving before damp spoiled them. The pump froze again from neglecting to drain it after dawn. They worked side by side through the afternoon. He hauled lumber. She measured cuts. He lifted the new gate rail into place while she steadied the post. Their motions found rhythm faster than speech ever had. Tools passed hand to hand without request. At one point they reached for the same hammer and both stopped with fingers touching on worn wood. Neither moved first. Then Ben came whistling around the barn corner, and the moment broke like thin ice. By evening the yard stood mended. Inside, Edith baked bread with Mrs. Barlow's yeast packet and the last good flour. Jonah cleaned the harness at the table. Firelight softened the scar along his jaw. Dust golded the edges of his hair. She set a loaf to cool. You may smile, you know, she said. I may not. It is legal now. We won in public. That seems argument against it. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound filled the kitchen strangely, as if the room had been built for it and gone years without. He looked up sharply, then slowly, uncertainly, he smiled. Not almost. Truly. It changed his whole face and left her with nowhere safe to look. A knock came at the door. Ben entered without waiting. Sorry to spoil domestic bliss, but there's trouble. Jonah was on his feet at once. What kind? Ben's expression sobered. South pasture, 2 steers down, looks poisoned. The smile vanished as if it had never existed. Jonah snatched his coat from the peg. Lantern. Edith already had one lit. They crossed the yard at a run, Ben ahead, Nate stumbling after with rope over one shoulder. Night had settled clean and cold after thaw, the ground crusting where meltwater froze again. Their boots struck hard earth and patches of mud by turns. The south pasture lay beyond the creek, fenced rough along a rise where sparse grass survived better than in the flats. Lantern light swung over rails, brush, and the dark hulks of cattle shifting uneasily. Ben pointed. There. 2 steers lay near the trough, sides swollen, legs rigid. Jonah dropped to one knee beside the nearest and touched its jaw, then the feed scattered nearby. His face closed into a dangerous stillness. Not sickness, he said. Bait. Edith crouched opposite him. A bitter almond scent clung faint beneath manure and damp earth. Crushed grain mixed with pale crystals glittered in the lantern glow. Arsenic, she said. Jonah looked up sharply. You know that smell? My husband invested once in a pest company that sold rat poison. It nearly ruined us before he managed the rest himself. Even now she could remember the warehouse reek, the labeled tins, the clerk warning her not to touch barehanded. She stood at once. Keep the herd from this patch, burn what's left, bury the carcasses deep and far from water. Ben crossed himself. Nate swallowed hard. Jonah rose. Can they trace it to anyone? If purchased in town, perhaps. If stolen, less likely. He scanned the dark beyond the fence line. Rourke. It may be him, she said. It may be a fool hoping to help him. Accusation first will only warn them. He hated that she was right. She could see it plainly. The remaining cattle pressed away from the poisoned ground, snorting steam. One calf bawled for its dam. Jonah vaulted the fence and drove the herd east with sharp whistles and sweeping arms. Ben joined him. Nate dragged the trough aside with all the strength youth could borrow from fear. Edith knelt by the bait, using a shovel to gather every visible handful into a sack without touching it. Lantern heat warmed one cheek while the other froze in the wind. Her skirt soaked at the hem. Her hands ached through gloves. When she straightened, Jonah was there. "Enough," he said. "There's more near the grass." I said enough. This patch could kill 3 more by dawn. He took the shovel from her grip. "Then I'll finish it." Their faces were close in the lantern swing. His anger was not at her. That made it harder to bear. "You cannot protect me from work," she said. "I can try. And if I do not wish it?" His jaw flexed. "That seems a poor arrangement for me." The words landed deeper than either intended. He turned away before she could answer and drove the shovel into the earth with punishing force. They worked another hour. By the time the carcasses were hauled and the contaminated soil marked for burning, stars had wheeled high overhead. Cold sank through wool, skin, and bone. Back in the kitchen, Edith scrubbed her hands at the basin until the skin reddened. Jonah came in carrying the shovel and set it outside the door before shutting out the night. Neither spoke for several minutes. She stirred coffee onto the stove. He stood at the window, one hand braced on the frame, staring into darkness where the pasture lay unseen. "At hearing today," she said quietly, "Talbot threatened time. This is costlier than threats. He'll deny it. Likely. I can ride there now." "And do what?" He did not answer, because there was no lawful answer that satisfied rage. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and held one out. He took it without turning. Their fingers brushed. He closed his hand too late, catching nothing but warmth already gone. "You lost stock," she said. "Be angry, but be useful with it." His laugh held no humor. "You make utility sound holy. It keeps roofs overhead." At that he faced her. Firelight moved over the scar on his jaw, over exhaustion, over something rawer than either. "Do you know what it was like before you came here?" "No." "Good. I'd rather you didn't." He set the mug down untouched. Every day was plugging holes in a sinking boat. Fence here, debt there, weather everywhere. Men looking to me for answers I did not have. Silence at night so loud it felt like judgment. She listened without moving. "Then you arrive," he said, voice lower now. "And in 2 days there's heat on the stove, orders in the books, neighbors in the yard, and someone telling me when I'm wrong often enough to make a habit of it." The room seemed to narrow around them. "That sounds inconvenient," she said. "It is." Yet he had stepped closer. She could smell leather, wood smoke, and the clean cold still trapped in his coat. "Jonah," a knock sounded. Both stepped back as if caught. Ben entered, hat in hands. "Sorry. Found tracks by the south fence." Jonah's face hardened instantly. "How many?" "1 horse, fresh enough before frost sets, shoes chipped on the left rear." "Rourke's Bay throws that mark," Nate called from outside. Ben nodded, thought the same. Jonah reached for his coat. Edith moved between him and the peg. "No," he stared down at her. "Move. No. He poisoned my herd, and if you ride there tonight and strike him, Talbot claims victimhood tomorrow. I don't care. I do." The words cracked sharper than intended. Ben wisely vanished, taking Nate with him. Jonah's voice dropped. "You care too much for a temporary wife." Her pulse beat hard in her throat, "and you speak too freely for a man guarding boundaries." Silence. The fire popped behind them. He looked at her as if the answer to something vital stood just beyond reach. Then he stepped around her, not toward the door, but toward the table. "What do you propose?" he asked. It was a kind of surrender. She breathed once. "At dawn we go to town. Quietly. Ask the feed merchant who bought arsenic grain. Ask the smith who reshod a chipped rear shoe. Gather proof before accusation. And if they lie, then we ask better." He held her gaze another moment, then gave one short nod. They slept little. This time, no debate was made about rooms. They lay again in the front bed, farther apart than desire and nearer than propriety. Moonlight silvered the ceiling boards. After long minutes, his voice came through the dark. "Edith." The second time he had used her name, it sounded easier, more dangerous still. "Yes?" "When you said in town you'd be left fighting alone, She waited. Would that trouble you? The truth sat between them like a living thing. Yes, she whispered. He exhaled slowly. Nothing more was said. At dawn they rode to town under a hard blue sky. Frost jeweled the grass. The world looked clean in the false way mornings sometimes do. The feed merchant denied selling poison grain to anyone, but admitted a laborer had purchased plain mash yesterday and paid cash. The blacksmith remembered Rourke's bay and the chipped rear shoe. More useful, he remembered replacing a spur strap for him near sundown. Man was in a hurry, the smith said. Wouldn't say why. From there they went to the livery. Rourke's stall stood empty. Talbot's clerk claimed ignorance too quickly. Jonah's temper rode close now, visible in every clipped breath. Then Mrs. Barlow emerged from the mercantile carrying bolts of cloth and said, loud enough for all nearby ears, "If you're seeking Rourke, he bragged last night he'd have hail begging by week's end." The square quieted. Talbot's clerk went pale. Public remarks had a way of becoming testimony when enough people heard them. Edith turned to Jonah. Now we have witness. He did not look at the clerk or the mercantile. He looked only at her. And with the whole town watching, he reached for her gloved hand and held it once, hard and brief, before letting go. Then he said, plain as weather, "Come with me." She followed him toward the county office. Halfway there, Talbot himself stepped from the hotel doorway and blocked the boardwalk. Talbot planted his cane across the boardwalk like a gate bar. Morning traffic slowed. People found reasons to linger nearby. Trouble drew a crowd faster than church bells. "You mistake temporary leverage for victory," Talbot said. Edith held the bundle of statements against her coat. "No, I mistook your arrogance for intelligence." Jonah's jaw tightened. She knew he was close to striking. Before either man could move, she stepped forward. "We are expected at the county office," she said. "If you wish to continue embarrassing yourself, do it under oath." She walked around the cane as if it were furniture. Jonah followed. Behind them came the rustle of curious feet. The office filled quickly. Edith laid out their evidence, witness statements, the blacksmith's account of Rourke's horse, the feed merchant's sale of mash, the tracks by the south fence. Rourke denied everything. Edith rose. One question. The clerk nodded. She faced him. "If you bought no mash, why is grain dust on your right cuff?" Every eye dropped to the sleeve. Pale residue clung in the seam. Rourke jerked his arm back too late. "Show your palms," she said. He obeyed under the clerk's order. The skin between thumb and forefinger was red and irritated. Talbot snapped, "This proves nothing." "It proves enough," said the clerk. Panic broke Rourke faster than law did. He rounded on Talbot. "You said it'd scare him, that's all. You said no one would know." The room erupted. Talbot's power fell apart in plain view. The deputy seized Rourke. No one rushed to help either man. Outside, spring wind carried the smell of thawed earth. Townsfolk tipped hats where once they had laughed. One by one they drifted away until only Jonah and Edith remained by the wagon. "It's done," she said. "No," Jonah answered. "One part isn't." He took the papers from her hands and set them aside. Then he turned back to her. "When you came to that church, I needed a signature. At the ranch, I needed ledgers. At the hearing, I needed courage that knew how to count." His hand lifted, paused, then settled against her cheek. "I do not need those things apart from you now." Her breath caught. "I married from necessity," he said. "I'm asking from want. Stay with me as my wife when no paper requires it." She did not hesitate. "Yes." He kissed her there in the daylight, certain and unadorned. They rode home together. The ranch still had weathered boards and leaning rails, but some places changed first in meaning and only later in wood. The bank accepted the new payment schedule. The roof was mended when skies cleared. The poisoned patch was burned and reseeded. Talbot's influence thinned by summer. Evenings became their own language. Sometimes she kept books while he repaired tack beside the fire. Sometimes he said her name from the porch at dusk. Sometimes in the dark when sleep had not yet come. By harvest, the kitchen smelled of bread and coffee instead of old ash. Her ledger rested beside his on the shelf, neither above the other. One cold evening, she watched him come in carrying split wood. He set it down, crossed the room, and kissed her as if such things had become ordinary. They had. Outside, Wind moved over the plains and found no cracks worth entering. Inside, the house was warm, and neither of them stood alone in it.